Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 12. Do you want to get started with web scraping using Python? Are you concerned about the potential legal implications? What are the tools that are required? And what are some of the best practices? This week on the show, we have Kimberly Fessel to discuss her excellent tutorial created for PyCon 2020 online, titled, "It's Officially Legal, so Let's Scrape the Web." We discuss getting started with web scraping and cover tools and techniques. Kimberly gives advice on finding elements inside of the HTML and techniques for cleaning your data. She also notes a recent change to the legal landscape regarding scraping the web. Kimberly is a senior data scientist at Metis Data Science Bootcamp in New York City. She also holds a Ph.D. in applied mathematics. We talk a bit about her switch from academia to data science and discuss her passion for data storytelling and visualizations. All right, let's get started. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world, interviews with experts in the community, and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hi, Kimberly. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I wanted to get a little background on your bootcamp. Is the name Metis, is that right? The Metis Bootcamp?
Yeah, I teach full-time at an immersive bootcamp called Metis, and we teach data science. So all kinds of different aspects of data science. It is 12 weeks long, and the students do end up doing 5 separate individual projects throughout the course of those 12 weeks.
Cool. Do you guys kind of steer them in a particular direction for the projects?
Yeah, I mean, the projects have themes, I'll say that. The first one is kind of more of exploratory data analysis. The second one, regression. And then we have classification and NLP. And then the final project is just totally up to them, whatever they want to do.
Oh, cool.
But that's most of the barriers we put on it. Other than that, they're really allowed to take that in kind of whatever directions they want.
You use the word NLP. Could you go into that a little bit? Because I think we're going to talk about that more as we go into web scraping.
Yeah. Definitely. That's totally my favorite project. So that's natural language processing. So anytime that you're working with text data and converting that into numbers to be analyzed, that's NLP.
Okay, cool. Partly why I wanted you to come on the podcast was to talk a little bit about the PyCon tutorial that you did as kind of a jumping off point for our conversation about web scraping. But I noticed on your slides that it mentioned that that was one of the roles that you had at different ad agencies that you were doing NLP.
Yeah, absolutely. So before joining Metis as an instructor, I was doing data science at various ad agencies. And, some of my favorite projects, I was mostly working on natural language processing. And a lot of those projects involved, combining data from various different sources. Our whole goal was basically to build a picture of kind of what the customer journey looks like. So that might be like, taking information from their search patterns and the types of reviews that customers leave and all those sort of things, and like kind of combining it into kind of more of a holistic picture. And so sometimes that did involve some web scraping as well.
So one of the key ideas that you put out front on your tutorial is the changes in some of the legality of web scraping. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the title of the tutorial, it's, officially legal, so let's scrape the web, is definitely inspired by something that happened pretty recently. There's a great article out there that the Electronic Frontier Foundation put out. It's about this case that just finally had a verdict in the last fall of 2019. It was HiQ Labs versus LinkedIn.
Okay.
And basically it was just it was a definitive, is web scraping going to be allowed or not? And we finally got kind of a little bit more of an answer based out of that case.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really the reason why there was a bit of a, mystery and confusion about this for quite some time is really because of something called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And that was something from like the 80s, but the act is written in kind of a really broad sort of way. And so it's been used for lots and lots of different types of cases. So people weren't really sure how it applied to web scraping. So this case finally, kind of.
The web really changed a lot since that time.
Yeah, it kind of finally gave us some direction on how that could be used. Yeah.
Cool. Do you think the original, like some of the stuff that was in there was really pre the web and kind of more of like generally about people doing more hacking and things like that?
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, originally the CFAA was aimed more toward hacking behaviors that, kind of were happening more and more frequently in the 80s.
Yeah.
But the law was written in such a way that's so broad that it's been used for things like people launching computer worms and even like cyberbullying and people logging in under their company's passwords to look up somebody that they know personally.
Oh, okay.
The law has just been used in so many different ways because it is quite broad.
That makes sense. That's good to know that at least there's some divisions now happening where you can look at what should be something that's similar to users just looking at the web and being able to automate some of that via web scraping.
Yeah, that's right. So the final case is kind of talking mostly about publicly available data.
Okay.
Things that you could just, read by launching your browser. But there is still some murky areas if you do have to log in with some kind of password, especially if you're trying to log in with somebody else's password. There have definitely been cases that have gone the other direction in the past.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess we could dive right in and just kind of talk about some guidelines and principles of web scraping and some different areas I wanted to touch on. But maybe we could start off with what would be good projects for people to look at with doing web scraping and reasons for them to approach this topic.
Yeah. I mean, can I say anything? I think really anything.
Sure, whatever they're interested in.
Honestly, just think about how much information is out on the web. There are tables of sports data. There are dollar figures about how much apartments are being rented for. There are tons of different text data that you could be using for natural language processing projects. So I really do think of web scraping as very empowering in that now you have access to all the different information that you can find on the internet, and you're able to collect that in an automated way.
Yeah, cool. What's your tool of choice as far as doing web scraping?
Yeah, so the thing actually that's in my tutorial, that's really the packages I use. Requests to get the HTML from the internet, and then Beautiful Soup is definitely my go-to for parsing that information.
Nice. So initially with using requests, you're setting up this ability to grab via a request, get the body of the web page itself, and then you're ingesting that into like a Beautiful Soup object.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, cool. And then from there, that's when you start to figure out how to parse it and kind of go through it, right?
Yeah, and then the real fun begins because developing strategies and trying to figure out exactly how to get, that one piece of text that you want. And that's the real fun of it for sure.
Yeah, so that's kind of what interesting part of it is. It's like, how do you find the elements that you want? Like what's a good, set of techniques for finding those separate elements?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely potentially tricky because, every website is different. A lot of them are structured similarly, but, a lot of them are different. I think kind of the two main approaches that people take, either looking for unique attributes,
okay,
for example, IDs that have been assigned to tags, or even, classes. If you can find a specific item that has a specific type of a class, those are kind of like the first thing I try are looking up by attributes. And then, if that's not working, then trying to navigate the DOM, like using those, using the position of the information I'm looking for to my advantage by looking for like parents or children or sibling or those kind of things.
So cool. That kind of gets us into a little bit of the nitty gritty and the idea that could be construed differently from a Python aspect of like, we're not talking about classes as far as Python or IDs as far as Python.
Right.
You're actually talking about HTML at that point.
Exactly.
And so how much HTML knowledge do you need to get through like a basic to dive into web scraping? Like how much do you think someone should know?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I don't think you necessarily need to be so expert at HTML that you're writing your own web page or anything like that. But you do have to have the foundations because otherwise you're not going to necessarily know what to look for.
Right.
The tutorial that I gave, I did include a little bit of basic HTML, and that took about 20 minutes of content. I wouldn't think you'd need a whole lot more than that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that kind of goes back to use the term DOM. What does that stand for?
The document object model. Mm-hmm.
And so that is a model or a tree of the layout for a website. Again, if it's properly structured.
You're right. Exactly right. So yeah, thinking about kind of the HTML itself in a tree-like structure is where you're really going to reap the benefits of, locating things by their position on the page. Yeah.
Okay. And so depending on how someone's structured that information, and they'll have, divisions, which you can use to kind of look at.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you kind of get into this idea of it can have a class, which I guess can be connected to the CSS of it too, like the styling.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Definitely connected.
Okay. So you feel like there isn't really a need to necessarily take a whole course on HTML and CSS to kind of dive in.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you have that knowledge, you're going to be in an even better position, but I wouldn't think you'd necessarily have to be super well versed. Though I will say, I have built my own web page in the past, and I think that's a great way to kind of like skill up in HTML is to just try it out and build your own pages. Yeah, that kind of practice always helps.
Yeah. And then the other tool that you're using quite a bit is looking at the page itself and then using inspect.
Oh, right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. So that helps you develop your strategy. So whichever kind of browser you're using, I often use Chrome, but Firefox would totally work, something like that as well. You can basically inspect what kind of HTML is powering that page. And so that's the way that you can kind of start to develop your strategy. Like this little piece of text I want to collect actually is tagged with this ID. And so now I can go back to my code and implement that and go ahead and grab that information.
Yeah. And so that's usually like something where if the developer tools, like in like a program like Safari, Chrome usually has the developer tools ready to go. Mm-hmm. You can practically just right click on a spot in the web page and have that information show up.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. You should be able to, whatever information you're interested in, you can right click on that, click inspect or inspect element, and then you should be able to actually see what code is powering that.
So it seems like it makes it harder if a web page isn't structured well, but it doesn't make it impossible. I guess it would be, depending on if you're going to go across multiple pages of a website, then that structure is going to be really crucial for you to be able to kind of continue your search, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, I mean, if you just wanted to get some information from one page, I mean, you might not even, develop a whole web scraping strategy. You might just use requests, pull the HTML, and then cut out the part that you actually need, right?
Right.
But if you do want to scale that up and you want to build an entire web scraping project, you're probably going to be relying on the structure of the site itself to make sure that you can kind of automate that process.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that. So like if it's timely based information that you're wanting to revisit or luckily have an automated tool revisit it for you, then that's where you really want to kind of look at those strategies where you can kind of go in and find that updated information again and again, or go across multiple pages.
Yeah. Right. Or, even if you're just building a project based on one time point, but you need to visit like 1,000 or maybe more, 5,000, 10,000 pages,
right?
Then you're definitely going to want some kind of structure there. Yeah.
So I was thinking about that. Like if someone was trying not to get frustrated, on RealPython, I created the video course for the request package. And one of the common things I see people do, like almost immediately, is they start using what they've seen just sort of briefly. And I'm literally hitting an API on GitHub and using a lot of these things. And it's an API, so it's an endpoint of a website that is very well structured for requests to be able to talk back and forth with it. Mm-hmm. And they'll take my techniques that I've been showing, and then they'll just throw it at a normal like web page. And they're like, well, it doesn't respond to me. And I'm like, and it's just a matter of really understanding, well, you're not really talking to per se an API. And so I think about that where to get somebody started on the right foot. And I started to answer in the comments like, okay, we'll try these sites, try these things. And then they actually will have like, written guidelines and tools for like how this API works, kind of like the whole for developers portion of that. Mm-hmm. And I think about the same thing, like if you're starting out in web scraping, like what are good examples of sites that are going to be well structured that people could try and practice?
Oh, this is a good question. Yeah. That's a good question. There's actually one site we use at Metis a lot. And I think the reason why we use it is because it's so well structured and because it has pretty generous policies as far as how much you can scrape, right?
Oh, good.
Yeah. It's called boxofficemojo.com.
Oh, cool.
So basically it's just about movies. There's various movie data. You can look up how much a movie has made in its history, what its runtime is, its release date, all of those kind of interesting pieces of information. And it is really well structured in that like most of the pages look pretty similar to each other.
Nice. So you're able to like, let's say you're going to do a study of, I guess it could be what directors have worked on, their particular projects and things like that. Does it go to those kind of metadata type of information about the movies?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Or like what actors like to act in similar films together, like who's been appearing together a lot or something like that. I could see a really cool like graph kind of project based on that. Yeah.
A full-on Kevin Bacon kind of thing, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, cool. And then in your tutorial, you go into doing stuff on Wikipedia, right?
Right. Yeah. Wikipedia is another great place to practice. I would definitely say Wikipedia is one that you don't want to request too much information from. I believe their guidelines are 1 page per second or something like that. But you do want to be very slow in your scraping of information from Wikipedia because, if you're not and you end up getting blocked from Wikipedia, that would be a really sad thing that you couldn't access Wikipedia anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
An example of that is if somebody went and set up their request portion of their script to just keep hitting page after page after page. To avoid that, you suggest putting in pauses. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, definitely. And I talk about this quite a bit in the tutorial as well, that you should really be adding in regular pauses. And this is probably good advice for pretty much any site that you are trying to scrape. It's really just about, respecting that server and realizing that, you are sending a request and they are sending you information back. And if you're just requesting a lot of information really quickly, you can really overload that site's resources. And so you want to try to avoid that. It could end up getting you blocked and it could end up just kind of being a creepy thing to do. You just really don't want to be a bully like that, right? Yeah.
Right. So what does that look like if somebody were to get blocked? Is it like just you get like a return that completely just says, sorry?
Yeah. You might start seeing, any kind of number of errors coming back.
Okay.
That you just don't get the HTML at all. You get an error code instead. But keep in mind, sometimes you can get blocked. It could be an hour, it could be a day, but you might get blocked forever.
Oh, wow.
That's possible too. And that would mean that your IP, even when you're actually a human using your own browser, you wouldn't be able to access that site. So that's the part that we definitely want to avoid.
Yeah, you definitely want to be a good citizen
Yeah.
of the web.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one to be careful with.
Right.
And that makes sense, because it's sort of a public project in the sense that they're looking for donations and there isn't really a business model underneath Wikipedia. So something to be a little more careful with.
Yeah.
Do you have any other suggestions?
Any other sites?
Yeah. That are just good ones to start with.
Yeah. Let's see. I think there's a site called like Sports Reference.
Okay.
That has a lot of different sports statistics. That one seems to be pretty good. And there are various scripts if you're interested in like analyzing movie scripts or, TV scripts, those kind of things.
Oh, okay. They'll give you the language stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is something that I've done in the past for NLP sort of work. That one's called Springfield, I believe.
That's funny. I guess because it's such a common city name.
Yeah. But actually, I think it's a site out of UK, so I'm not sure why it's called.
That's interesting.
Called Springfield. Yeah.
Too funny. So this is something that I was wondering about with the structure of the sites. At some point, as you're thinking about going to like multiple pages, you had mentioned this in your talk also, or your tutorial, that what can happen is if you get blocked or if there's an error in your script, is that you could lose your data also. So that's another advantage of maybe putting pauses in or potentially saving as you go between each one of these grabs. Is that right?
Yeah, you absolutely want to save as you go. And that's what could happen. I mean, it's not even just a matter of just getting blocked, but if the site structures just happen to change a little bit, or if you encounter any kind of error at all, it's possible that your code can completely stop. And then any data you've scraped so far could completely be lost. So I would definitely recommend, not only just putting in the pauses and being respectful, but also just saving whatever information you have And that I usually recommend, it kind of depends on the site and how much data you're gathering, excuse me.
Sure.
But probably every, maybe 50 pages or so, I would save that information, either writing it to a CSV or maybe saving it as a pickle file.
Okay. In setting up your tools and doing this, I know that a very popular tool for doing all this would be in Jupyter Notebooks, as far as like kind of walking through that. Is that the tool that you use for doing your exploratory parts?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I definitely start out. I usually start out in Jupyter, just trying to see and make sure that I've got the right syntax for looking for the different pieces of information. But I would say once I've got a good scraper going and I know that this is like working on multiple pages, I'll usually put that into a script so that I can just run it from my terminal and just have it running elsewhere.
Nice. Yeah. And that would allow you to like potentially set it up for scheduling too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It's about a topic that may be confusing for new learners. It's titled Defining Main Functions in Python. In the course, Rich Bibby takes you through creating this starting point for your scripts or applications, and he helps you to understand topics like what the special name variable is and how Python defines it, why you'd want to use a main function in Python, what conventions there are for defining the main function in Python, and what the best practices are for what code you want to put into your main. I think it's a worthy investment of your time to understand this vital entry point for your Python scripts and applications. And like most of the video courses on Real Python, the course is broken into easily consumable sections, and you get code examples for the techniques shown. To check out the video course, you can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the newly enhanced search tool on realpython.com. So I guess one of the key things that you're going to get into, obviously, is finding the elements of the page, the things that you want. And we kind of went down that road just a little bit, but you were talking about the document object model, the DOM. When you're trying to find elements that you may need to, unfortunately, have to look around for elements around other elements.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some techniques there like that help you with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the kind of most common way that I see this done is that you will notice that there is some text on the page that is near the text you want. So for example, maybe in that Wikipedia example in my tutorial, you might notice that like the median household income is labeled median household income, and then the dollar figure is right by that.
Right.
So you might actually look for that text. And the nice thing is you can actually look for that text, and it doesn't matter necessarily what kind of tag or what kind of element it is. If you can find that text itself, then you can use whatever element it is part of to look for the next element, which is actually probably the dollar figure that you want.
Yeah. So you can kind of just find the neighbors of all, all these items.
It's almost like doing a search right on the page. You're just looking for text that you actually saw and that is nearby. Yeah.
I guess the next big topic would be, okay, so you've collected all this information and it's, in a text format, right? Mm-hmm. Pretty much everything you're going to pull out of Beautiful Soup is going to be a text string of the HTML itself. So what are practices that you have for kind of getting it to a point where it's like more usable data?
Yeah. No, I mean, this definitely kind of varies depending on how you're actually going to use the data. I mean, a lot of times you'll want to convert numbers to, string numbers into actual numbers, right, in Python. So
sure,
maybe, converting things to integers or floating point numbers, things like that. And the data that you're probably going to get web scraping will be kind of messy. So it's actually interesting. And most people, this is kind of why they don't like web scraping. I actually think it's fun to have a challenge, right?
Sure.
So like, you might have dollar signs that you need to strip out, or commas, or even some like non-printing characters. You might have some kind of like Unicode stuff on the page
sure,
that you actually need to get rid of before you can convert it into, let's say, numbers.
Okay. So would you use like regular expressions? Would that be something useful?
Yeah.
Okay.
I use a lot of regex. And I think that's kind of where I started skilling up in regex, was really because I was doing a decent amount of web scraping. And that was kind of like why I needed to learn more about regex.
Sure.
Yeah, I would definitely say regex is a top tool for dealing with that. But there are some, nice Python things. If you're just trying to replace certain characters, you can just use replace, those kind of simple sort of methods.
Yeah, so a lot of the string methods, that's
Yeah.
another course that I did, is a whole deep dive into all the types of things and how you can look at, the end of the string, the beginning of the string, you can look for characters in the middle of it and stuff like that, and try to find
exactly.
all the things that are not like letters or what have you, or numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other tools that you use for cleaning?
I guess the other thing that you might come across and would need to be aware of are dates and times.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And in Python, you're going to want to convert those to date times, because you're probably going to, either want to bucket things and have kind of a more high level. For example, like if I have the date and the time of something, maybe I actually just want the year, right?
Okay.
And so if I'm trying to change the time scale of the problem, then I'm definitely going to want that as a date time so that it's easier to work with down the road.
And do you use outside packages, or are you using some of the built-in stuff for dates?
Yeah, there's some pretty nice built-in sort of Python stuff to do that. I did actually start looking into a couple other date time parsing packages recently. I was actually this weekend kind of exploring the various different ones to see which ones worked for me. So for example, like DeLorean or Maya, or there's all kinds of different date time packages out there.
What would they add that the normal date time stuff doesn't have?
Yeah, those are more, what I was finding is that they're going to be more useful for me for things like shifting like time zones and doing arithmetic and those kind of things.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of a little bit later. But some of those do have kind of more lenient parsers for daytime strings. Yeah, some of them being a little bit more focused on that than others, but yeah.
Okay, so they could look at the raw text of a date and
Yeah.
be able to turn it into a better date time object without
Exactly.
you having to do as much wrangling.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes, and it's totally fine to do all this stuff with your native sort of Python code, but sometimes you'll have to provide really explicit instructions. For example, in this string, the year comes first and followed by the month and then followed by this comma, or, you have to provide the exact pattern for it to be able to detect that's a date time.
Right.
Some of these other packages are a little bit more lenient about what they will recognize as a date time.
Yeah, cool. I was thinking about the issue of losing your work as you're going along. Do you have any examples of that happening to you?
Not so much to me, but my students, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for them.
Okay.
I feel so bad for them. They have a limited amount of time to do their projects,
Right, sure.
And so losing days worth of data, it's really sad. You don't want to do that. You want to avoid that at all costs. Because the other thing that can happen, just kind of going along with that, let's say that you did scrape a bunch of different pages. You sent a lot of different requests out there. Maybe you did hit your limit. You can only request so much information per day, and you happen to lose all the information that you got the previous day, right? So you're losing time along the way too. Like it might not be that you can just automatically redo all of your work.
Sure. Wow. Yeah. And now you're potentially in a hurry
Yeah.
and trying to scramble to get everything back, and you're more likely to put yourself in a situation where you get yourself blocked by trying to rush through all of that there.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned briefly, as we were talking about example sites, that there are sites, unfortunately, that may require a little more work to get into. And I was dealing with this. I was working in a marketing department for a bank, and we had an outside vendor, and everything, we were trying to automate things, right? So we were like, it'd be really great if we could have it just automate this process of going to this website and grabbing this information and pulling it back down. And we started to look at other packages, and I know you kind of touched on them at the very end of your tutorial, but is that where you start to move into something like a Selenium?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is kind of, I feel like a lot of websites are heading this direction. It's going to become more and more important. So anytime that the site is dynamically generating and loading content,
yeah,
and by that I mean that they're hitting a database, they're pulling information and inserting it. Maybe it's a personalized recommendation or something that's needs to be generated on the fly. Any of that kind of information, requests and Beautiful Soup is probably not going to cut it.
Okay.
because you do have some like dynamic elements. So Selenium is usually the way that you go for that.
So examples of that would be some of the new things like React
Yeah.
and other JavaScript packages.
JavaScript, for sure. Yeah. We see a lot of JavaScript sites. Just think about like YouTube search results, or one that I bring up often is like opentable.com. Like if you're going to make, check out the different restaurants in my area, those are going to be kind of, some of that content is going to be dynamically generated.
So what would Selenium do for you? What is it adding?
Yeah. So it's pretty different. So Selenium is actually, if you're running it in its kind of original form, Selenium will actually launch a browser for you. So I often use the Chrome driver version of Selenium because I like Chrome.
Okay.
So it'll actually launch a Chrome window. And so because that's being launched, the content will actually fill in. All of that dynamic content will actually go ahead and fill in. And so sometimes like the most simple examples of using Selenium, all you really have to do is load the page with Selenium. Then you can still use requests and you'll get the HTML from the driver, the Chrome driver, and then you process it with Beautiful Soup like normal. So maybe even launching with Selenium would be enough to like pull in all that dynamic content.
Okay. So adding that additional like import statement in your script of like, okay, we're going to start with Selenium. It's going to open up a browser page. And that may be enough, like you said, that because it was dynamically going there and not just using requests to grab it, it's now populated an instance of an HTML thing that Beautiful Soup can sort of ingest then.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the next level of that would be like, if you wanted it to like click on things and stuff like that, that's part of it, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so that gets to like the, more fun components of Selenium. You can actually use Selenium to interact with the page. So clicking on things or typing or various, you can actually even like do all kinds of interesting things with Selenium. Those are kind of the most common, clicking on things or typing as well. Yeah.
Right. So typing would be, if like in my example, I have the credentials to go to the site, but I don't want to be doing it every day myself, I could have it programmed so that it not only clicks on this, it fills in the credentials that I need to be able to access this particular site that I need to automate it, and then click the button to submit or whatever.
Yep, that's right.
So you kind of create like a script of sorts, right?
Yeah, exactly. So all of this like interaction with the browser is being done automatically through a script, which can be really nice, Yeah, it can be really nice.
Yeah, cool. Are there other tools like that kind of expand on the world of web scraping?
One other tool that I haven't actually got to play around with much, but I have heard other people say, has been helpful if they have a large scale web scraping project.
Okay.
Package called Scrapy. So it's just a separate package that you can kind of design your web scrapers and then, launch them with Scrapy. Actually, Scrapy even offers cloud services. If you didn't want to do the scraping on your local computer, you could actually launch that through their cloud. I do think that's a paid service, but it is kind of interesting that they have that option as well.
Oh, so you're kind of creating a bot of sorts with that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be really useful if you wanted to like index, various sites or those kind of things, or wanted to follow lots and lots of links, build like a little spider crawler. You could do that with Scrapy. Yeah.
I think that's the one that I was playing with about 2 years ago. I've worked in environmental science, and I was helping my client like try to get a bunch of governmental forms, like PDFs, that he needed to basically, he wanted to catalog them because it was hard to find this information. And so I used the Scrapy to basically help me automate the downloading of all these PDFs. And then I was able to like write the script so I was able to name them.
Yeah.
And like, create them in folders and stuff like that to sort of gather this information so that he could have it instead of have to constantly go out on the web and grab it. So cool. So you're saying you were working on some new date time packages. Is there a particular project that you're kind of working on right now yourself?
Oh, that was actually for something that I am interested in that's coming up, an event. PyOhio has recently submitted, hey, call for submissions because they are going to be doing a virtual thing this year instead of an in-person. They're actually going to be doing like 5 or 10 minute talks this year. So it'll be nice and quick.
Okay.
So I was actually kind of exploring the various packages to see, would I like to give like a brief tutorial on one of these packages?
Have you been to lots of conferences in the last several years on this?
it's kind of fun. I've been to a few. I went to a few last year, but I was really planning on 2020 being my big year for conferences, which there goes that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my plan too.
I know. So I did PyCon, which, the tutorial ended up being virtual, and then ODSC East, the Open Data Science Conference.
Oh, okay.
I did that one also in April, but that was all virtual as well. It actually turned out really great. Everything went smoothly and according to plan, but it was interesting to give, a live talk just from the comfort of my own home.
Yeah. So that one was not pre-recorded.
Right.
Okay, cool. How long was that?
That was about a 40-minute talk, 45 minutes, something like that. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have a background in like public speaking and stuff like that?
Oh, well, certainly in education. That is what I do, the last couple of years.
Right.
I was in academia for quite some time, and I would say that that's a skill that kind of carried over from academia. We often gave talks. And so I've been to a lot of like mathematics conferences and things like that, just a little bit newer to the data science scene for conferences.
And that's what your PhD is in.
Right.
Is in mathematics, right?
Exactly. So my PhD is in applied mathematics, and I also went on to do a postdoc at Ohio State University. So I was in the academic scene for quite some time and delivering lots of technical talks during that time period.
What made you switch out of academia? Is that okay if I ask that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's definitely many factors. I guess that's probably what a lot of people who made the switch would say.
Yeah.
A lot of personal and professional sort of reasons. I think for me, mostly it came down to, I wasn't necessarily super excited about the idea of needing to apply for funding, or really excited about the idea of needing to move anywhere in the US that I happened to find, a professor position. So,
oh yeah,
there were definitely big roadblocks for me in those two reasons. Yeah.
Were you doing some programming throughout your applied mathematics?
Definitely, yeah.
Journey?
Definitely, okay. Yeah. So, most, I would say a lot of applied mathematicians are going to be doing some kind of coding these days, right?
Yeah.
But the packages the kind of language that most, at that time everybody was using, like MATLAB was a big one.
Sure.
That's probably what I first learned on. And then eventually switched over to Python when I was doing my postdoc. Yeah.
This is a question that I've seen occasionally in the comments inside of the Real Python, Slack channel. People have wondered about that, journey of kind of switching over. And my last episode that I guess in this case will be 2 weeks ago, I was talking to Kyle Stratus, and he really sort of like fell in love with the programming side of it when he was kind of switching out of academia. And he's like, actually, I really enjoy this part of it. Was there a particular moment for you where you looked at, you already mentioned like kind of the whole track of having to like find work and so forth, and continuing that. But what was some of the reasons that you switched into more of the programming side in Python?
Yeah. I think for me, it's going to be kind of the opposite side of data science. I really like programming, of course, but
sure.
From that math background, when I was doing my postdoc, I took a course, actually just sat in on a course. It wasn't like for a grade or anything, but I just sat in on a course because I was interested. And that one was like a statistical learning course.
Okay.
So it was really kind of the fundamentals of data science, but from a math perspective, like really starting to think about, matrices and, the loss functions, and really kind of putting the math to it, to how you could explore data really rigorously and mathematically. So that's the part that I actually really, why I kind of that led me to data science, was really kind of more the math angle. Of course, programming has followed suit as well, but yeah, I still get really excited about the theoretical components of data science. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, actually, that kind of leads into some of my weekly questions here. Like, what are you excited about in the world of Python? And again, it could be a package or an event or hardware, what have you, but what's something that you're currently excited about?
Yeah, definitely that PyOhio thing. I'm really excited about kind of seeing people distill concepts into 5 to 10 minute videos. I really want to see what people come up with. I think that's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to hopefully participate in that as well. And then, the other thing that I'm always on the lookout for, like new NLP, packages and things to do with natural language processing. So I actually saw a talk, it was at Open Data Science Conference by Ali Vandervelde. And so she's at ShopRunner, and they actually developed a package called Tonks it's like a deep learning model where you can have multiple different objective tasks And you can combine both image data as well as text data to meet your objectives. So I thought that looked really cool, and I'm definitely wanting to check that out.
Nice. I have a few people that I've talked to on the podcast, but also a friend from Real Python that were involved in Python Pizza. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, no.
It's another conference that happened about a month ago, and it was very similar, sort of lightning round kind of, I think of, 10 minutes. I think it was maybe 12 minutes, something like that. And so there were like several talks every hour, and it was mostly, I think it's based mostly in Europe. For me in the US, I had to like wake up at like 3 a.m. to watch some of my people talk that I knew. And it was very cool, but it's all, luckily with your paid thing, everything was recorded and you could kind of go back and watch it, which, and then they'll make them free after that. But it was really kind of neat to see, what kind of information can be covered in these sort of little short snippets and kind of like get you excited about a topic so that you can kind of jump off and go into. It's something I'm trying to do with the podcast a little bit, is like try to have multiple topics and multiple like kind of jumping off points for people, and provide all the links for that. So I'm definitely excited to include the open data science stuff and check it out myself to see what the talks are on that. Is that one on YouTube?
I don't think so. No, Open Data Science Conference, they are still keeping their video. I don't know if they're going to put those up on YouTube. I know the PyOhio videos are going to be on YouTube.
Okay, cool.
So yeah.
When was the date for the PyOhio?
I think it's in July, mid-July.
Okay. So then I had a couple other questions that I'm working on as kind of like a regular thing. And one of them is, what is it that you want to learn next in Python?
Well, again, there's always like a ton of things on my radar.
Sure.
One other thing that like we haven't talked about yet that I am, I always keep thinking I'm going to do more with are data visualizations.
Oh, yeah.
So I really also love data visualizations. And, last summer I was really into Plotly. So I was building lots of different Plotly things and trying to think about interactivity and those sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But one thing I haven't done yet that I'm still thinking I might at some point is think more about like map data.
Oh, okay.
So for example, like GeoPlotlib or using GeoPandas or those sorts of things. That's something that's always been kind of on my radar.
Yeah. I played with Plotly a little bit, and then I did a course on Bokeh.
Yeah.
And I really liked it. And I liked a lot of the interactivity that it provided, some of the stuff where you can have these sources where as you click on things, it can kind of affect the other items in it. It's like you can kind of do some filtering. And then I jumped on that and went into a whole JavaScript area with that myself, where I was like,
yeah, me too, actually. Yeah.
Because like the D3 landscape is sort of massive. In fact, like you look at Plotly and Bokeh and a lot of these things, a lot of them are, kind of coming from that because there's so much sort of groundwork that's been done, and, it's already the web. So a lot of it's going to be JavaScript.
Yeah.
So there was this tool that I was using that kind of combined a tool from Square. It was called Crossfilter. And the idea with Crossfilter is that it would allow you to create dimensions. You would sort of create this index of all the things that you want to look at, and then you would create dimensions that you could kind of compare things across, and then allowed for really dynamic filtering inside of it, which I thought was really cool. And that was one of the talks that somebody did at Python Pizza is they had created a package that used it, like kind of their take on Crossfilter. And I still need to learn more about what they did there. My only problem was that a lot of it was powered to be able to do real-time mapping kind of data, like stuff that you were just talking about. But it required that you had this massive machine that, had like it actually ran on a graphics processor, and I don't have that.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things where when you get into like really large data stuff, or you get into really big mapping and visualization stuff, that you may need this sort of back end to be able to do real time of that. And so I was like,
Definitely.
well, I'd like to see at least what they created, because I really enjoyed the Crossfilter thing. I was using it for banking data. It was like a deposits thing where you could click on a particular branch and then it would like just show the information for that, or you could click on the region and would filter and just show that region. And so I would have all these pie charts that would like, basically spin and resize. And it was really kind of fun, kind of animating all of it.
Yeah.
Very much of a dive into JavaScript though.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently was like, okay, I'm just going to learn D3. I'm just going to do it. So I did.
Yeah, that's huge.
Like create a couple widgets, and I was like, wow, this takes so much time.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe back to Python for a while.
Yeah. I'm hoping to maybe talk to some more people on the data visualization thing. And if you have suggestions for people, let me know. Because there's the one package, Altair, I was thinking about looking at.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that's something I'm looking at down the road to add as we go into it. Because I really like that part. Like I like the visualization part, but I also really interested in the interactivity part. Like I really want to provide non-programmers with the ability to manipulate the data somewhat, and look at it and change it and stuff.
Well, I mean, the thing for me with like the interactivity, it's just that you can show so much more data that way, right? Like it completely changes the game, right? You think about what you can show on a static chart. It really shouldn't be showing too much, right? Like usually, you have to present this to somebody and it's going very quickly and you have to create really clean, simple visuals.
Understandable.
But when someone's able to like interact with your data, you can really, have a lot more components and a lot more information to share. I think that's really cool.
And you're doing a lot of that and kind of playing with it in Plotly?
Yeah, Plotly so far. I actually, Tableau sometimes even, not a Python thing, but got to try.
You got to use the tools that are available. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Cause I mean, that's the thing, like in the end, it's like, well, who's going to consume this? Do I have to put it out? Like one of the recent tutorials that I've been kind of looking at is someone doing stuff with, I think it's called Open Pixel, or, it's basically an Excel thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at that and there was like a way to generate all those kind of things inside that are somewhat interactive inside of Excel, creating charts and stuff like that, but also it doing, when the values are changing automatically, conditional formatting, is that what it's called?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it was showing you how you could kind of set that stuff up and create the rules for it. And I was like, well, yeah, there's a lot of people that you're going to work with that are not going to be able to run your Python script, or, again, with Plotly, what's nice is that it's creating a web type of tool. But sometimes that was even hard for me with in certain places where I would work would be so locked down that you couldn't even really, put something out. And that was considered even just not on the web. Even if you had like login credentials, they wouldn't, for security reasons, allow people to go to it.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was go back to Excel, So
yeah,
totally.
Yeah, I think that space is also really cool. Even non-professionally, like you think about how many people are now consuming data, just in like journal articles. If I'm looking at New York Times or NPR or something like that, there's so many more people now that are comfortable with playing with like data widgets, and I think that's kind of really cool that that's become a lot more mainstream these days.
Yeah. You're talking about the things that they're putting in there were parts of like the New York Times or whatever website are now interactive, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just people in general, not necessarily technical people, but just, the population is becoming a lot more sort of data literate and really craving those sort of interactions with data. I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So this is another new one I'm working on, which is, I'm wanting to call it hidden Python, but they're not necessarily need to be hidden. They're just things that are maybe lesser known, tips or tricks that you could maybe share in your experience of, doing data science or just Python in general.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. One thing that it's not revolutionary at all, but
sure.
One thing I can think of is actually the function called transform that people use in pandas.
Yeah.
So that one, I think, gets overlooked a lot, but it's oftentimes like exactly what some of my students or what I, want to do. Basically, you're doing kind of like a group by, but then filling in those values for every single cell so that you're not really changing the dimensions of your data. You're just like getting those aggregates by group and, creating those values for like every single cell, that you have.
Yeah, I think of the pivot tools that are there too.
Yeah, those kind of things as well, like being able to pivot. And if anybody's coming from an Excel background, realizing that they can still do these pivot tables,
right?
I think is a little bit lesser known thing that people don't always think about that they can do.
Yeah, that whole pandas area is something I want to dive deeper into on the podcast.
Yeah.
I enjoyed working on it a lot.
Yeah.
I really want to thank you for coming on the podcast and talking to me.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I want to thank Kimberly Fessel for being my guest this week, and you really should check out her tutorial. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast in your favorite player. And if you like the show, leave us a 5-star rating and a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and look forward to talking to you soon.